Hello everyone. We are continuing talking about the double line graphs, and now we'll discuss the conclusion part of it. So, just to remind you, of course you know that, but just to remind you that in the conclusion we need to talk about the explanation. You need to give explanation for the overall trend and some other important trends. Mention unusual trends if something looks different from the rest of the graph, the importance of the information, who and how can use it. You need to give advice to whoever can use this information, make predictions, and suggestions for future research. Well, we were talking last time about this double line graph. And when we want to explain the trends, we need to look at the lines. Yeah, the first line, the blue one, shows the amount of steel produced. Yeah, and the orange one shows the actual demand for steel. So what you need to ask yourself is two questions. What affects or what can affect the demand for steel? Yeah, so where is steel used? Yeah, what do we use steel for? And also, what can affect steel production? So two things: what can affect the demand for steel and what can affect the steel production, right? Because we need to explain why, why the amount of steel produced has dropped and why the demand remained the same. So when we make research about that a little bit, of course, Google it and read about steel and where it is used. I have found a few things like it's used to produce vehicles, machinery, tools, and build some buildings. Yeah, so why is it important to know? Because demand is why people need steel, right? And if, for example, like they stop producing vehicles or tools or machinery, then the demand for steel will drop, right? Because people will not need as much steel as before. When we talk about steel production, we need to see what is necessary for steel production. What do people use for steel production? And actually, I'm not an expert in that, but I've Googled it and I found out that these things are used to produce steel. So imagine, like, coal is very important for steel production. Imagine coal disappeared for a while, yeah, or it's difficult to find coal. So what will happen? The steel production will drop if there is not enough coal, right? So that's why we need to read about it and know like what is necessary for this and how it's still used. When we talk about unusual trends, it's something that looks very different to you. Yeah, you look at these graphs and you see that in general, like what is it called? Amount of steel produced was between 4,000 and 5,000. Well, a little bit here, dropped here a little bit, right? And then surprisingly, after it increased, it dropped drastically to lower than 1,000 million tons mark. So for me, this is unusual. Like, why did it drop so low, right? So I think this is an unusual trend. And when you look at actual demand, it was between 2,000 and 3,000, here. And then suddenly it dropped to almost zero. For me, it's unusual, and I need to mention that. However, if you think there's nothing unusual, you just need to write there are no unusual trends. Importance of the information. Well, we need to ask ourselves who can use this information and how. Yeah, like demand for steel, for me personally, it's useless because I'm not interested in steel production and using steel as well. So who can use this information? I think the government, because it needs to regulate steel market prices somehow, right? To make sure prices don't go too low or too high. And also people who are involved in engineering, construction, and equipment production, right? Because steel is used to produce like cars, construct buildings, make some equipment, tools, and stuff like that. So people who are involved in this business owners of these areas, need this information to plan how much steel they need to buy, right? And depending on the price of steel, the price of buildings, machines, and tools will decrease or increase. All right. So, to give advice and make predictions, we again need to ask ourselves who can use this information and how. We discussed already. Like I think the government, and then people involved in engineering, construction, equipment production. And then we need to think what advice can you give to these people involved. So this is my advice to the government. The government should control the street market, steel market, and not let the supply become much higher than demand. And then you need to explain why. You know, it's not it's not enough just to say, okay, the government should control the steel market. Why? Why? And that's how you give prediction. You have to support advice. And this is my advice for business owners. Okay, you can read it, pause the video, and enjoy it. Future research suggestions. I think most students get stuck here and they're like, what? What can we talk about in future research suggestions? We have nothing, like no ideas. So look at this graph. This experiment, whatever, research here, looked at the amount of steel produced, the actual demand for 1 year, right? So you need to think, what else can be explored around this topic? What else, what other pieces of information would you like to know? I mean, not you, maybe, because you're probably not interested in steel, but say the governments or business owners, right? What else would they like to know? And here is the list of like the topics that I came up with. For example, the scientists can look at the demand versus production of steel for 3 years, not for 1 year. Here it's 1 year, right? So they can extend the period of time and get more information about it. Also, you can compare the demand for steel versus demand for iron, because iron is used to produce steel. Demand for steel versus steel prices as well, or construction prices versus steel prices, because steel is used in construction. Okay, well, these are just a few topics. Of course, the list can be endless. All right. Now take a look at this conclusion. I usually see something like that when students write it. You can pause the video and think what can be changed here to improve the structure of the conclusion. All right, hopefully you have paused. Let's start with something good. The good thing is the person who has written that mentioned advice and gave some prediction, right? So advice, the government should control the steel market, and then some prediction, blah, 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 will remain the same in the future. Fine, but there are a lot of things actually missing here. And if you write something like that in the midterm exam, it will not be good. So first of all, there are no linking phrases. Like, absolutely nothing. The ideas are not linked. There's no explanation for the trends at all. Instead, a person just repeated the same, like, okay, the trend, what happened here. But you have written it already in the analysis part, so no need to repeat that unless you want to explain it. Then the importance and uses of the information, this bit is missing. When a person gave advice to the government, they didn't explain why the government should do that, right? And of course, there's no future research suggestion at all. Okay, so this can be improved. That's all for now. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you have no answers, no questions.